Hey, I'm Rivky Gross, and I'm here with my co-host, Chani and Frankel. Welcome to our brand new podcast, The Possibility in the Universe.
We are so humbled to offer our second episode called The Possibility in Perspectives, an engaging conversation full of real-life examples that open pathways to create the shift in perspective that becomes the shift in our reality. This episode is full of real-life experience and laughter and just great conversation. And we're so happy to have you with us.
Hit subscribe to stay connected with us and to be notified when we drop our next episode. We invite you to listen until the end of this episode, where we will share more about ourselves, the work we do in this world, and ways to stay in touch. Enjoy listening.
Welcome to our second episode of The Possibility of the Universe. I'm Chani, and I am joined by my beautiful friend, Rivky Gross. Today, we are talking about the possibility in perspective. And I use the word in and not of very intentionally because we all have perspective. And this is about dropping into the possibility in the perspective that is already here. Yeah, let's get into it.
Yes. I am so excited to talk about this topic because perspective is everything. Perspective is what shapes our actual reality that we live in. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into how deeply our perspective shapes our reality. But I want to begin actually by talking about perspective through the lens of trauma and how our perspectives might be. The reason why I want us to begin speaking about this is because sometimes when somebody's been through a lot, right, and they can start listening to a podcast or reading a book, or with somebody who says, you can just change your perspective to change your life. And inside of themselves, they might be like, well, you don't know what I've been through. So in this beginning of this podcast, we want to acknowledge what you may have been through to shape your perspectives that shape the fabric of your life. And from what I understand about trauma is that trauma limits the possibility of perspective. We're here to talk about the possibility of perspective, and trauma limits the possibility of perspective and creates this like tunnel vision for in which we view the world. And we may view the world through the perspective of what we have been through, as opposed to what's actually happening. Because one of my favorite lines is, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And even more deeply than that, we see the world through the lens of what we may have been through, what may have shaped us, not who we truly are in our essence, but what we have been through and what may have shaped us.
Wow.
Yeah.
I so appreciate the compassion that you're opening up the space with, because I resonate with that deeply. Like this modern edgy way of just like, you're in control, you're the one who's, create your own destiny, write your own story, all of these kind of things. And I feel like offering consideration for everything that comes before the moment that we arrive here, and to acknowledge at the moment that we are here, like everyone who chose to be here today with us, everyone who chose to listen, the audience that we are speaking to are obviously here because they are honoring themselves and their journey. And they're also at this precipice of readiness for what more can I offer myself? And the knowing that more exists, the knowing that whatever shape this, it is limited in some way. And I know that somewhere out there is more expansiveness, more capacity, more possibility, ultimately, that I can offer myself in being here in my own experience. So thanks for making it so soft, such a gentle landing in the space.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my favorite perspective about perspectives is,
Which is your perspective.
which is my perspective,
Yes.
just letting you guys know,
Yeah.
is that everything is neutral besides for the thoughts and the feelings we place upon it. But with a caveat, the thoughts and the feelings we place upon the neutrality of our existence sometimes, always actually, is formed by an unavoidable but never true conclusion that we created about ourselves in our childhood due to unmet needs. And if we are human, we have unmet needs, not because our parents might have been bad or maybe very limited or maybe not very limited at all. And still, we have unmet needs because humans cannot fill all the needs for another human. And when we have unmet needs, we create unavoidable conclusions about life. And the way I like to break that down is that when a child is 0 to 2 years old, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So when a need doesn't get met, they don't start to believe, what is wrong with, does my parent have what's wrong with my parent? Does my parent have a mental health issue? Is my parent struggling with finances? What's going on? They start to believe there must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. And that's why my need didn't get met. And that's where unavoidable but never true conclusions get created about ourselves and the world. And those unavoidable but never true conclusions, until they are brought to awareness that they're unavoidable but never true, create the template for our perspectives. And we see the world through the lens of the perspective of our value that was created from unmet needs, or the world's safety that was created from unmet needs, etc. So Chani and I both really thought it valuable to bring that perspective here before we go and talk about the possibilities in the universe of perspective that is infinite, that we truly, deeply, fully believe in. We want to presence this for you because we presence this for ourselves. We presence this for ourselves before we run away with infinite possibility of perspectives.
And the presencing ourselves is giving us our own validation for our life experience that was unavoidable. We were victims of circumstance, and we did the best that we could with the tools that we had. And we did the best that we could to survive, because as a little child, we are little mammals working in tandem with the universe and survival, because that's all we know. That's the only way that we can do this, protect ourselves so that we can make it through. And I think that giving, even for myself, that awareness to myself has allowed me to expand capacity, because once I understand that there's no one to blame, no one is at fault, everyone is here doing the best they can within the framework that they have available to themselves. And we can't look at ourselves now and judge ourselves then. We're wiser now. We are stepping into this new frequency. We're listening to this podcast because now we're ready. Now we're ready to hold ourselves in all that was and step into what's possible with all that is. That is already. It's almost like recognizing what is, and also the expanse and capacity of what else lies ahead when I allow this to myself. When I let go of blaming or shaming or all the ways that we hold ourselves captive and stuck in those places, to understand that it's okay. It's okay. They did the best they could. I did the best they could. And now what's possible?
Yes. And as we shift our perspectives on perspectives together to create the possibility in the universe that we are here to be in co-creation with each other and all of the listeners here with, I want to also say something about perspectives being a visceral experience. So
Yes.
it's not only about shifting our perspective or our thought about something, but my experience of you and I could both be having the same exact experience, and my experience in my visceral reality is completely different than yours. I remember once taking a walk with a friend down the street in Brooklyn. I think it was actually with you,
Oh,
Chani, and there was this like kind of scary person around, or at least I experienced it like that around us. And I kind of moved away, and you were kind of walking very, very confidently straight ahead. And I remembered it dropped in that moment in my head of like, my experience of this person is different than Hani's experience of this person based on whatever nature, nurture, perspective, probably possibly what we like believed to be true about whatever it was in that moment that brought us all the way up till that moment. And I remembered dropping into that so hard when I was able to see my perspective was subjective,
yeah.
was subjective to me. My
Yes.
perspective was subjective to my experience. My perspective was not objective. My
Yes.
perspective was my experience. And when I can understand that, and when I can actually learn to shift my own visceral reality, then even if the outside thing doesn't shift, even if that person is still walking down the street, my internal reality and my relationship with the circumstance begins to shift. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remembering a story that my brother reminded me of myself that I didn't even remember. So
Yeah.
he told me, and I remember aspects of it, but he's like, you bought these purple boots and you felt really confident about them, and you came downstairs, flaunting yourself down the steps. And my mother was sitting there, and she had this very intense judgmental reaction towards the way that I was presenting. And my brother said his heart stopped in his chest, and he was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And it just viscerally had such an intense reaction in his own body. And I was like, you don't have to like them. And I literally walked out of the house. And that whole experience for him was something that was so in his body, this whole thing. And that really shaped and shifted many ways of his progression forward. And I don't remember it. I do remember the boots, but I don't remember that experience. I believe the experience because I know myself as a child or like a teenager or wherever I was holding at that time. But it's just so wild how we could just be subject to the same thing, and depending on our previous experience and our position in the dynamic, that creates so much of what each of us are experiencing.
Yes.
Wild,
Yeah.
wild,
Yeah.
wild.
Wild. It's wild to consider, and it's even more wild to consider that when we consider that possibility in perspective, it's so much easier to consider the shifting of that, because we don't need to shift the outside thing in
Yeah.
order to shift the inside. And my favorite thing to say is when we change the game changes. We're not concerning ourselves with solving the problem at the level of the problem. We're not concerning ourselves with shifting the outside reality, because my experience of the reality is so subjective to my own experience of the reality, which then I can be, when I understand that perspective, I can be so much more empowered to shift into something else. So that's where the perspective shifting becomes visceral. And one of my teachers calls it like visceral. Like when it's
Mm,
an experience, a visceral experience, then it becomes real. And
mm,
just just letting you guys know that we're going to be speaking about this in future podcasts, but this is where quantum energy work works. It's that when we shift the inside, the outside, even if the outside doesn't shift, we still shift our perspective on it. And the next level is that when we shift the inside, the outside does actually shift in really miraculous ways. Because when you take a step in the dance, when you make a move in the constellation, when you create a shift in your life, the dance has to shift around you. So, without a doubt, possibility and perspective creates possibility for shifting the concrete reality in which we live in. And that's not even what we're talking about today. We're even talking about just the possibility of perspective creating a different visceral internal reality. So just letting you guys know that we're going to be speaking about quantum shifting as well.
Right, which makes me think over Rosh Hashanah, we were sitting on the couch in a little huddle of discussion, and my daughter, I had come out of the bathroom, and it was reflected at me that, yo, you look so beautiful for Yontif. Like I, put something on that was nice. And I said something to the effect of, I always had so much comfort and ease in my reflection. Like anytime there was a struggle with my body or like the way I look, my face has always been consistently something that I feel good about. Other things, pregnancy, this, fluctuations, like there's been learning experiences that I needed to shift perspective to love it deeply in different ways. And then my daughter Noah was sitting next to me, and she's like, that's so interesting, Mom, because just the other day when I was getting dressed, I caught a glance of myself in the mirror, and I thought to myself, I'm so pretty. And then in that day, what happened to her was that the universe reflected that reality back to her, where both friends in school said to her, Noah, you're so pretty. And even passersby on the street said to her, you're so pretty. It's like when I have that perspective of myself, I exude that energy outwards, and the world is there to reflect it in kind. I mean, I was so in awe of her. And I was like, you are 14 years old in the frequency. That's insane. Yeah. I was not aware like that at all, but also to receive the reflection and to understand in reality that the ways that I perceive is the ways that I receive. And that's just a real thing. It's real. Yeah. And she got to experience that. Yeah, my mind was blown, literally. Who are these children of this next generation?
I'm laughing because of the thing that we always say, heintige Kinder, which means like new age children.
Yes. Which comes with all the things, but this is priceless. This is a really priceless.
Yeah. By the way, little interrupt. My friend told me this week, she said, I'm learning Yiddishisms and conscious Hebrew from your podcast. I was like, I'm so happy to be of service.
Perk of our podcast is that you will learn little Hebrews and Yiddishisms. So cool.
Yeah, she said, I'm learning, I forgot the way she named it. Like, I'm learning spiritual, energetic Hebrew. It's just so funny. Yeah, but in Noah's perspective, what it offers the whole entire world is a new objective reality. It's like my subjective reality becomes the template in which the world sees me, which is so wild because it's like where the subjective can merge into what is actually true for everyone also around me. And whether it isn't true, and if it isn't true for those around me, then that's their projection. So there's subjective, there's objective, and then there's projection. But if
it's like, whoa.
Yeah, there's all the things. But but Noah's subjective reality, her experience of herself became what is everyone's experience of her around her. And when we shift our energy, people's experience of even our outsides shift. And that is just an other level perspective that we love to walk with.
Yeah. I just traveled to Israel to visit Avi and spent 10 days with him. And we had the privilege of meeting this amazing rabbi, Kabbalist, painter by the name of Rav Yoel Torjaman. And he just passed away, which is like its own airy experience. And when we sat with him, we ended up sitting with him for 2 hours, the most magical journey I think I've ever been in my entire life. But one of the things that he offered, which was such a gorgeous invitation, he told me, he's also a musician, obviously. If you're an artist, you're just all the things. But he said his friend sent him a recording of thousands of croaking frogs. And he asked him, can you hear the symphony? And on the face value, 1,000 croaking frogs is just a hell of a lot of noise. It's just a lot of noise. And his response, obviously, because this friend of his is on the same frequency of him, he said, I wonder what would happen if you shifted the dial to a different frequency, what would become possible? And of course, the friend already knew that that's what his response was going to be. And he sent him the recording of the same 1,000 frogs on a different frequency. And he said it was like listening to a symphony of instruments harmoniously playing that was so powerful and unbelievable to listen to. And it was just such a gorgeous invitation into the possibility of perspective and in perspective. This idea of what it looks like on the outside, the noise that it is, the disturbance, the inconvenience, the uncomfortability, the your fault, the your problem, you know, and the shift that you offer yourself in the frequency shift that suddenly creates a totally different reality and experience of the same exact thing.
Wow.
Whoa. I was just like, yeah. So
I
walking
heard
with
this
that.
story before. It's so wild to consider. I heard this story before, and as you were saying it again, I just feel shivers. Like it just the exact correlation to what we're talking about in terms of shift in frequency, like turning the dial on frequency and what that has to, and what symphony that has to offer us, like what music that has to offer us is just such a wild thing to consider. It's such a good parable, such a good parable.
Yeah. And I feel like that invitation is for all of us here. We came to listen to this because we're ready to consider that. We're
Yeah.
ready to recognize that we are in the power of the shift of the frequency because we hold the dial, right? We get to be in whatever experience externally that it is and choose the way that we want to be with it. We get to choose what I would love to experience in this situation by bringing ourselves into the consciousness of the power that we hold in this. And
Yeah.
of course, it
Yeah.
comes with everything that came before, but we're also standing here. We're also choosing this moment. We're also choosing to listen to the podcast that's called The Possibility in Perspective, which means we're ready. We're ready to know that. We're ready to become conscious of it in a visceral way so that we can have the experience that we desire because it's here for us. It's a gift. It's literally a gift to be in consciousness of knowing that I get to choose the experience that I'm having based on my perspective of it. That's wild. That's just wild to me.
It's wild to consider, and it's wild what can be created and
Yeah.
can be experienced with the shift in the frequency. You're reminding me of the story of my teacher and who broke her back that I would love to share now.
Yeah.
It was just, I think this story was a life-changing story for me to experience. So even dropping into it feels so big inside of me.
Mm.
But my teacher was teaching and talking, one of my teachers was talking about pain and suffering. And this idea that pain is pain. Pain is inevitable. We stub our toe, someone dies, all suffering is created from one of these unavoidable but never true conclusions that I created about myself or life due to unmet needs. And my teacher spoke about this idea that she broke her back. She's an older woman. And she, for the first 2 days, she sat in excruciating back pain. I would never want to wish that kind of pain on anyone. And she was thinking about how she shouldn't have took that walk that she took that day. And she was thinking about how the doctor who gave her the surgery was negligent. And she was thinking about all the things she was thinking about. And none of those would have been wrong, quote unquote, things to think about. They all have kernels of truth to it. And then she realized, she said, I'm in pain and I'm suffering.
Yes.
And she took herself back to what was the unavoidable but never true conclusion that I created about myself in childhood due to unmet needs. And she took herself all the way back to this belief that she is doomed. For whatever reason, she believed that about herself and about life. And as she took herself back to that belief, she put a hand on her heart and she said, oh, honey, you aren't doomed. You believed you are doomed because when you were a child, it felt like you were doomed. She said, but look at the life you have lived up until now. And she released herself back into the present moment, out of the mind rumination suffering. And what happened was that the pain did not shift. It was still excruciating, but her suffering ceased. And she said, in between the moments of pain that she was able to experience without the stories or the suffering, she noticed the trees that she hadn't noticed before that were right in front of her, right outside the window. And she noticed her husband who was alive and able to help her go to the bathroom. And she noticed the sheets on her bed and the fact that she had a roof on her head. Her tunnel vision widened. Her trauma lens expanded, not in a spiritual bypassing way where she didn't anymore experience pain because that wasn't truthful to her. She was feeling physical pain, but her suffering ceased, and therefore her lens expanded to include all the possibilities that were available in the universe with this new perspective. And when I heard that story, it changed my life because it is so incredibly empowering to consider that there's nothing wrong with my pain or my grief. I don't need to repress it, suppress it. That just causes depression and more sickness and for it to pop up at a different time in my life. What that's not what moving away from suffering is asking for me. Moving away from suffering is asking me to actually acknowledge what I or you or we may have been through to create the suffering narrative. And then to release myself back in the present moment to all that is, not only the lens towards what isn't. And I hope and I pray that this story can impact one of you listening as much as it, or many of you listening as much as it did for me. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I've also heard that story and I just had such a drop in with that. I am so amazed by the expanding of tunnel vision doesn't actually make you see something different.
Yeah.
It just allows you to appreciate what has always been right here.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see it because of whatever it was that I did that helped me all along. All of that is valid, but we're not even accessing something that's beyond reach. We're just allowing ourselves to be with what has been and is as soon as that vision opens, as soon as we gift ourselves the compassion for our experience and the honesty going inward to allow that to ourselves. And we're not creating new things. We're just being with the unbelievable amount of what there is in this universe that is already in our life experience. It's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful for this invitation, like all of these invitations, it's such a possibility to allow to yourself if you want to take it, because it's available to us. We just have to choose to take it and then it becomes,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. 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 Wild to consider. Wild to consider. I want to ask you a question, Khani, of
Absolutely.
something we were talking about earlier that I would love for you to share, which
Okay,
was the story of I would love to unpack the conversation on top of the table and the conversation under the table topic, which we
cool.
will share with our listeners what that actually means to us. And I would love for you to bring us into that thread with the story of your friend and her vacation. I would love
Yeah.
to hear and learn about that.
So last night I had the privilege of spending time with a friend, and she was talking about a few days that she had, that her and her husband both have off that correlate that they want to go on vacation. And the issue is that they both want different things of this time. So for him, he wants to fly somewhere warm, stay in a really nice hotel, and go that route. And for her, she prefers to drive somewhere and to be in a cabin and have her coffee and take a gorgeous hike and have that kind of experience. And on face value, yeah, that seems a given. Like it feels like one has to win. There's this duality. It's either this or that. And my question to her was, well, what is it for you? What is it that you desire underneath the differences that's riding, that's motivating where you want to be? And she was like, well, what I'm really craving is deep, intimate, present time with my husband. And so going to an airport is already so distracting and overstimulating and so much movement, where sitting in a car together and driving offers me what I really desire. And staying in a hotel where you're seeing people in the lobby or this and that versus a little tiny cabin upstate that's quiet and remote offers the sacredcy of our intimate time together. And so my question was, what if you shared that? What if instead of focusing on the way that we are different on the outside, we can go into what our inner experience of what this is and speak from the place of the desire to spend intimate quality time? That's my motivation. And I don't know what happened because I know that they're going to have that conversation. But my intuition tells me that when we speak from that place, I am sure he wants the same thing ultimately. And the focus on the outside of what it looks like is the focus on the differences of the way that it manifests. But when we talk from the place inside of ourselves, that honest place of what it really is coming from, we say the message clearly. We say the message where it can be received in the way that we are offering it into the space.
Yeah. The conversation on top of the table is the concrete problem. It's like the thing that's actually going on, the thing that's the difference between me and the difference between you, and what we're dealing with here. And what you offered them was actually that's the conversation on top of the table. But what's the conversation that's actually happening underneath the table, which is like, most probably, your intuition is correct, and we both desire intimacy and connection with each other in a way that feels that way for us. But when we can actually say what's going on underneath the table, then we create that bridge. And the offering of perspective in this example that you're bringing and that we're in this conversation that we're speaking about is really like, what's actually happening here? Can I widen my perspective to see that there might be a third thing happening here? There might be another thing actually happening here. I was having a conversation with someone close to me recently, and we were talking about something, and we both sounded very smart and very passionate and very quick and very wise. And I paused for a minute and I was like, but actually we both feel unheard, unseen, and misunderstood. And that's actually, and we both want, and what's actually happening under the table is that we want to be seen, heard, and misunderstood. So on top of the table, it looks like we're both giving a sermon to each other about something very important, very wise, and very urgent and pressing. But
Yes.
under the table, we're actually like two children that have unmet needs that we're desiring for each other to fill. And when I oriented that conversation towards that, there was like a drop in. There was like this moment of, oh, that's what's actually going on here. And I think that by your offering to your friend, you gave her the drop in moment of, oh, what's actually going on inside of me? And when we orient to that, we start to learn that some conflicts, like me, you, push, pull, this way, that way, is actually not even the thing. The thing that we think is the thing isn't even the thing necessarily.
Well, the thing is kind of like the uh, protest for the need that it's actually asking to be filled. So
Mm,
it shows up in this way because what I'm actually doing is protesting to your idea because I'm trying to tell you I need something else without telling you what I actually desire or what I actually need, hoping that you're going to pick up what I'm putting down or hoping that. And sometimes we don't have access to that consciousness fully either. We're like stuck in a habit of the way that we show up and we don't even take a moment to recognize it. But I think that what you're offering into the space here and what we came in this conversation is what if there's a third way?
mm,
What if it's not this way? It's either this vacation or that vacation. Those are our two options. And so when we pick one, the other one is fully lost. Or if we pick the other, then the other one's fully lost. So it's a very dualistic reality where only one can win and someone
yeah,
has to sacrifice. Someone has to
yeah,
give up what they hoped for in order for there to be. But what about a third way?
yeah,
Because in the third way, when we bring what we're really hoping for to the table, we recognize we actually both want that.
yeah,
We
yeah,
actually both, like you said, want to be heard, understood, and seen. That's what we want. That's what we want. We're covering it up by this choice of this versus that. But if we can go and consider when we are standing in front of a crossroad and we feel like there's only two ways, the possibility in perspective is to widen the lens and say, what if there's a third way? What could that third way, if I can consider that there could be a third way, what's possible in that space? And what's the truth inside of me ultimately? These are protectors and respect them. They're offering you so much guidance. It's here because it's protesting because it wants you to have what you need. It wants that for you so desperately that it's like, no, you have to do it my way, you know? But if we can allow ourselves to go further than that point, open up our lens and be like, well, what would it be like if there was a third way? Then I create spaciousness for what's inside of me that's being protected by this dualistic, like this versus that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really cool. I can't wait to catch up with her and see what happens. But
yeah.
but we know it. We know it. Yeah.
And orienting towards perspective, towards the third way, when we orient towards what's actually under the table, the third way becomes clear. Because as
Yes.
long as we cannot solve a problem at the level of the problem. It's something that I will say until I'm blue in the face and very old.
Yes.
We cannot solve a problem at the level of the problem because the problem that we're dealing with when it's in our concrete reality is our interpretation of our experience of it.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
if I was to going back to that story with the walk, if I was to remove that man from the street, that's not solving my experience of how I felt inside of my body. And Connie's experience was completely different than mine. So
Yeah.
we cannot solve a problem at the level of the problem. There are experiences of people, there is basically no objective reality. I've read stories about people who were in jail that were like, or locked up in some kind of crazy way, who were able to access the pain without the suffering. Because of the gift of their perspective. So even though concrete reality is so important to take into account. And that's why we spent quite a bit of time at the beginning of this podcast really presencing that and holding this nuanced perspective. Also, we can't solve a problem at the level of the problem because we're not actually addressing what's actually going on. And when we address the thing that's going on under the table, the third way appears, because that's the way, because the third way is the way of the heart. The third way does not live in a binary or dualistic reality. The third way is something else. The third way is the possibility in the universe.
Yes, and the third way holds both.
Yeah.
Because then nothing is being rejected or neglected, because that third way, once you allow it to be what it is from within, is everything together. What I loved is when I went to this rabbi in Svat, I sat with him for over 2 hours in deep, transcendent conversation. There was not one story about circumstance. There was not one story about this versus that, my problem in something, in a relationship, in my money, in my, no stories. This was you in relationship to yourself and the possibility of perspective, because that's what you offer yourself and the universe. Because the stories is in the problem, and you're not going to solve the problem in the problem. And it was so wild to me, because I've heard stories about rabbis my whole life, about the rabbi at the end of the shtetl and the people, and they traveled so far and they wanted to have, they needed parnasa, which is, livelihood, or they wanted to have a baby. They came with the problem. They came to get a blessing to solve the problem. And there was this kind of like savior mentality in relationship to rabbi, where he gave you the blessing and things worked out the way that they did. And that's true. And I'm not taking away from that. But sitting with this particular rabbi offered me something so different in the possibility, in perspective, because it was not attached to stories. I sat with somebody for 2 hours and didn't tell one story about myself, one story about an experience that left me uncomfortable, upset, nothing. It wasn't about that. He just went straight in. What is it that's standing in the way of your flow? It's no one else does that. Nobody, it's no one else's, it's like nobody else. It's you in relationship to you that offers you the most that is possible in this universe. And to me, that is just a frequency that I already missed, because he's not here anymore. And it's just so crazy. But I feel so, so chosen and lucky that I got to experience that I got to understand something in such a visceral way of being able to be introduced to this frequency and understand that it's not in the story. It's not in the story. And it's the story both externally and the story that we tell ourselves. Like you're saying, the suffering is the story that we tell ourselves that keeps us in those, in the binds, in the holding spaces. And to be able to be in the power seat of the shifting of the frequency and understand that that's available to me as it is to every single human, and to be able to recognize the part of myself which came forth in it right away. It's once you're not in the story, like you said, the third way arrives immediately. It wasn't a question. The word that was the embodiment of all the things that I am now walking with arrived. That word is protection for me. So, but that's a whole other story. But it was just like, oh, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it in relationship to myself.
Yeah.
And so now I have that awareness, and now I get to walk with what's possible in that space. I just got so emotional, because it's just, it's like, I felt like I literally dropped into an alternative reality, which is real, is real. It's almost like we live in this reality that's an illusion, actually. And the reality that's under the table is the reality that we can access, which is the alignment, the attunement, the honesty, the getting our needs met in a way that is is deserving and loving and compassionate. Just
Yeah.
such a beautiful possibility.
Wow. May his memory be a blessing. And
Amen.
also the
Amen.
perspective that I'm choosing to believe is that the frequency is still here inside of this realm of consciousness, not only because it's still here because frequency is frequency, but because for whatever transcendent reason you have met him and he has transmitted some of that frequency to you, which now you are walking with and being the possibility of the universe, even in this moment, to transmit it. And you're also reminding me of the work that I do in the world, which is offering these modalities of somatic work, subconscious work, energetic work, where you can come to a retreat and you can leave and you can know someone's soul and not know most of the things that they may have been through. And Chani actually makes a delicious food, and nourishment is the chief of nourishment at the retreats that I offer. And it's really wild. So we've experienced that together.
Yes.
It's really wild to consider that the stories of the people, we know the people that leave on the deepest, most attuned level. Some of the people who left the retreat said that they've never experienced that level of connection to a soul. And the stories were very far few and in between.
Yes.
And when you enter into that frequency that we're talking about, this vibration, then what you experience is even deeper connection, because what we're addressing is the thing under the table. And I wish for the whole entire world that we can begin to have conversations about the thing under the table. Because when we are having those conversations, then we are actually meeting each other. We are actually connecting. We're actually not talking on the vibration of my unmet need butting against your unmet need and creating this kind. We're not having that kind of conversation. We're having conversations that actually flow and fill and create more oneness in the world. And even when we think of it on like a cosmic level and what's going on in the world at large, like people aren't listening to each other because their perspectives, their protection is inhibiting their perspective. And when
the protection is a response of the trauma, like we protect
is a
ourselves.
response of the trauma. And when we can remember that trauma is an unavoidable, that trauma caused those unavoidable but never true conclusions or protections, then what we can create is a new reality where we have those conversations and we live in a reality where we talk about the things that are under the table as opposed to the things that are over the table. And I bless each and every one of us listening to this podcast that we bring that energy into the world. Like you can go into the grocery store with that energy. You can go into the nail salon with that energy. You can go to teach a class with that energy. You can go into your parenting or to your partner or wherever it is with that energy. And what happens is that when you shift into orientation towards what's under the table, the whole world shifts around you. So consider the possibility in the universe that you are when you shift perspective.
Yeah. I mean, just a little funny thing that was like coming through. It was like next recording, we need to do under the table. Like the two of us just sitting under the table, two mics facing each other under the table. And maybe that should be our advertisement, like us two under a table, you know?
It's like Amelia Bedelia vibe.
Yeah. I think it was so cute. And if you get it, you get it. You know what I mean? If you're on the frequency, you listen to the podcast, you know what we're talking about. You get why we're under the table. I think that would just be so funny.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so we have another minute to close up and to, I'm just thinking, what would you love to, or what would we love to offer our audience to walk with as they take everything that they've heard and consider all of what has been spoken here And what is something that we can gift all of our listeners, and I'm so grateful for. Also, I just want to just take a moment of gratitude. First of all, Hashem, Hashem, just that, and there's no words, in milim, which means no
Yeah.
words, but also gratitude, because doing this, stepping into this, and for it to be received in so many beautiful ways, so many gorgeous reflections, so many heartfelt messages of joy, appreciation, support, love. Like, it really is unbelievable.
Yeah.
We have so many beautiful souls with us, amongst us, surrounding us, supporting us and encouraging us, and it's so deeply felt.
Yeah.
Like, it's so deeply felt. And so I just want to shout out to everyone who's here, because the possibility in the universe becomes possible with you. That's how it happens. We each offer it to each other. And so, just so much gratitude and appreciation for all of you. And I wanted to ask you, what can we offer, something to walk with into until next time?
Yeah. I think, again, just bringing us back full circle. It's
Yeah.
the idea that everything is neutral, besides for the thoughts and feelings that we place upon it. All of life happens in the present moment. Only now does life happen. So when I'm not present, which is when I'm ruminating, when I'm with something from the past or something from the future, can I ask myself, what is the unavoidable but never true conclusion that I've created about myself, ultimately, in childhood, due to unmet needs that may be taking me away from the present moment right now, in this moment? What am I believing? What am I believing about myself and about life? And when I can remember that, and I can remember that it's unavoidable, I can again bring myself back to the present moment where everything is neutral and nothing is wrong.
Yes. Everything is neutral and nothing is wrong.
Yeah.
It's Noga, the energy
Yoga.
of the translucent energy that is just potential.
Yeah.
When everything is neutral, we're just in the space of the potential of what we create with it. And so
Yes.
if I walk with that, if I walk with this beautiful translucent energy that is available to me, that is neutral at all times, and I offer myself that perspective, what becomes possible in my perspective now, moving forward?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening. Like Chani said, we would not be here without all of you, and we can't wait to be with you next time.
Yay. Mwah. Au revoir.
It's always just so fun and adventurous to be in conversation with you and to see what happens here on this podcast of the possibility of the universe. We're so glad you've made it till the end, and that we can be here with you to share more about ourselves and how it is that we show up in this universe.
The Possibility of the Universe podcast is only possible because of you, our audience. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much for being here, and thanks so much for listening. I'm Chani. First and foremost, I am a believer. I am a wife. I am a mother of 6 beautiful children. I am the co-owner of Mimulo, luxury florist and event production company. I am a life coach working with both individuals and couples to empower them to step into their own possibilities in this universe.
Hi, I'm Rivky, and I love life. I love heart-centered living. I love to be curious, and I love to connect with all things. I started off as a social worker and developmental therapist, and now I work as a somatic and subconscious practitioner, using modalities such as somatic healing, breathwork, bodywork, hypnotherapy, and some really magical and incredible quantum healing technologies. I work with individuals, couples, run retreats and courses using these modalities to help people find the most freedom, presence, aliveness, and embodiment inside of their lives. The ways to contact us are through my website, rivkygross.com. That is spelled RIVKY dash, the straight line dash, gross, GROSS.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, Chani at Muckhome Sanctuary, and myself at Rivky Gross. We are here for any and all questions and feedback